What's up guys, I'm Mad Morta, and in this video I'm going to be building a custom Nintendo Switch dock. The idea behind this project is that I'm going to be building a modular plug-and-play sort of faceplate for my Switch dock that makes it look like a Gamecube without having any kind of adapter hanging off of it or anything like that. For this project, I'm going to be using a Gamecube controller adapter made by YCC Team, a few different pieces from a Nintendo Gamecube that I had laying around, some glue sticks and a hot glue gun, a soldering iron, and a few screws that I happen to have laying around in my box O screws. As I said, I'm going to be using this YCC Team branded adapter. It's important to note that different brand adapters, even though they may look the same, will most likely have different internals, as I've already seen several different ones. However, this one matches up nearly perfectly with the GameCube's faceplate, and that spacing is going to save me some time. I did find out later that it's actually about a millimeter off, but it was close enough that I didn't have to worry about it. First off, I'm going to start by removing all 4 of the screws on the bottom of this adapter. The adapter itself comes apart very easily, and I didn't have to worry about prying it open or anything like that, which isn't always the case. You can see on the front there are 4 GameCube controller ports. On the back there are 2 USB ports, one for rumble and one for controller inputs. Inside we have the 4 ports, and we have a switch along the back to switch from PC versus Wii U. As you can see, once we've taken it out of the case, it fits a little bit better with the faceplate, and we can see that very little adjustment is going to be needed. However, it doesn't fit quite well because there's a few different pieces we need to take off, which you can see here. Instead of using a Dremel or anything fancy, I decided to simply cut them off using these cutting tools, but you can use anything you want. I actually also ended up removing one more later on just to make it a little bit of a better fit, but once we cut those off, we can see that it is nearly a perfect fit, give or take about a millimeter horizontally. Along the edge of the PCB, you can see that there are some wires for voltage, data plus, data minus, ground, and a second voltage wire. The second voltage wire is actually just going to the rumble USB port, the gray one, which is only used for rumble. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to consolidate these 2 USB ports, one of which is used for the controllers and one of which only does rumble, down into one USB port that does both the controllers inputs and rumble as well. This is actually a lot simpler than it sounds. All I have to do in this case is rewire this black USB port to be a bit shorter using the same color pattern that's on the circuit board right now. And then I'm going to add one more wire that connects the 2 5-volt lines. In other words, the 2 pads that have red or brown wires to them together. By connecting these together and by making sure that the 2 black wires, the 2 ground wires, are connected, we're making sure that both the controller and the rumble are able to get power from the source, which in this case is the switch. By making this only one USB port instead of 2, it's going to look a lot nicer. So finally, we can get started on the case itself. So I'm going to go ahead and start by adding these memory card port covers onto here with some hot glue. The reason that we need to hot glue these on is because there's no way to snap them on. They don't naturally hold on to the GameCube faceplate. In fact, they were originally held in place by the GameCube motherboard, and since we don't have a GameCube motherboard, we're going to have to hot glue them and then make sure that they're in place. Once we have both memory card slots securely in place with hot glue, we can do the same thing for the GameCube controller ports, making sure to add a little bit at first, and then once we've got it securely in place and it's lined up perfectly from the front, then we can add a bunch more hot glue. I would recommend adding a lot just to be on the safe side, because in this particular case, more is less. Shortly after hot gluing them in, I realized that I had to remove this switch because it took up more room than I wanted. So what you need to do is just solder 2 of those 3 pins together. You actually want to solder the 2 that are towards the middle of the circuit board, not the 2 on the outside that I soldered there. As you can see here, I nearly ran out of filament when 3D printing my case, but it actually came out okay. Easy peasy, once I print it out, I can just hot glue in the Gamecube faceplate and we're almost done. We just need to make sure everything fits in properly before putting the last couple of screws in. Here you can see that I am test fitting this on my Nintendo Switch. Everything fits together, it looks good, and we need to make sure that this wire isn't quite as long as it is. If you remember earlier, I snipped it off at a pretty random length. I didn't measure anything. I just sort of cut it at a place that was convenient at the time, and then I soldered it on. And we're going to plug it into the back of the Switch and then make sure that it's just as short as we want it to be, making sure that there's enough room for that right Joy-Con to fit on top of it. If you put it too tight, it might make the right Joy-Con want to sit up a little bit higher, so we want to make sure that it's got plenty of room. Once we have it lined up, we can take the GameCube controller dock off of the dock, and we can secure this USB port in place, making sure that it can't pull out. I decided to use a zip tie because that's actually what a lot of controllers use on the inside to make sure that the controller wires aren't pulled out during play. It's unlikely this wire is going to get a whole lot of force put on it because it's really just going to sit on your dock. I can't imagine removing this and then adding it back and then removing it and adding it back. I'm going to plug it in once and leave it alone, but it's good to be on the safe side just in case something happens and one or the other gets detached, and we want to make sure that this wire is not going to yank out by those carefully soldered points on the circuit board, because that would be unfortunate. So I use a zip tie. I put it tightly around the wire here, and then I'm going to use some hot glue just to make sure that everything is in place as tightly as it can be, and there's no wiggle room after we add the final 3D printed piece, which is the back plate. So I'm going around all of the edges, making sure to get some hot glue in between the zip tie and the edge of the wall, and then I just need to hold it in place until it dries and cools off to make sure that it's not going to be going anywhere. From here, the very final step is to take the other 3D printed piece that I designed, which is the back plate, and we're going to put it on using those 3 screws that I pulled out of my random box of screws. These screws actually come from a Nintendo Wii, and I take apart so many Wiis that the majority of the screws that I have laying around are from Wiis, so these are the ones I'm going to be using. And I didn't design any kind of fancy screw posts. There's just a hole in the 3D printed plastic, and when you screw the screw down in there, it sort of self-taps into the plastic and it's not going to fall out, it's not going to go anywhere, it's actually very secure. So once I have all 3 of the screws in here, I realized that there was a little corner that I needed to cut out in order to make it a little bit nicer. So you can see here, there is now a little hole. The reason for this is that when I designed it, I wasn't thinking of the zip tie, and for my next iteration, I will actually make that hole the cable goes through sit a little bit lower so that the zip tie won't be holding up this back plate here. If you remember, I'd almost run out of filament when 3D printing this spice orange colored GameCube faceplate, so that's why the back is black. I would have preferred to have matching colors, but no one's going to see it when you have it on the Switch. And that's it. We can just plug it in and it's all good to go. Here you can see that the Nintendo Switch itself fits perfectly in the dock, and the cable goes right underneath the right Joy-Con without being super obvious about it. The fact that it takes up this back USB port instead of taking up the 2 on the outside, I think adds a lot to it. It makes it look very clean. It makes it look like it's not just an adapter that's hanging off of it. You can see underneath my TV we have our new little GameCube dock, and if you weren't looking too closely you might assume that it was a GameCube rather than a Switch dock. So let's try some Smash. All of the files that I used for my project here are all open source. I put them all up on Thingiverse, and you can actually click the link in the description to download those files and print them out, give them to your friends, make them for yourself, bring them to Smash tournaments, anything you want to do. And that's about it for today. Thank you guys for watching.